جدول الأعمال المؤقت لهذه الجلسة الحالة في ليبيا. اعتمد جدول الأعمال وفقا للمادة 37 من النظام الداخلي المؤقت للمجلس. أدعو ممثلي ألمانيا وإيطاليا وليبيا
So decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Tarek Mitri, Special Representative of the Secretary-General and Head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. It is my understanding that the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. Members of the Council have before them document S/2014/629, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Australia, France, Germany, Italy, Jordan, Luxembourg, the Republic of Korea, Rwanda, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favour of the draft resolution contained in document S/2014/629 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favour. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2174 of 2014. I now give the floor to Mr. Tarek Mitri.
Thank you, Mr. President. In recent days, armed confrontations, which are both the cause and the result of deep divisions among Libyan political factions, have been unprecedented in their gravity and, to be sure, very alarming. The House of Representatives has resolved that groups fighting under the name of Fajr Libya, Libya's Dawn, and Ansar al-Sharia are terrorists and outlaws. The Fajr Libya coalition charged that the transitional government and the newly elected House of Representatives violated the constitutional declaration and lost legitimacy, considering their call for foreign intervention an act of treason. They asked the former General National Congress to convene. The General National Congress, whose tenure has expired at the election of the new House of Representatives, designated Omar al-Hassi as Prime Minister and asked him to form a national salvation government. Since my last briefing to the Council on July 17th, armed battles, inflamed by airstrikes, continued almost uninterrupted in Tripoli, Benghazi, and other parts of the country. In Tripoli, we have seen an unprecedented movement of population in an attempt to escape the fighting. Conservative figures for those displaced are estimated at over 100,000, with at least another 150,000, including many migrant workers, have sought refuge abroad and fled the country. There is a general deterioration of living conditions. Food, fuel, water, and electricity are in short supply. The departure of foreign medical staff and shortages in medical supplies has rendered the plight of civilians more critical. A risk in criminality has contributed to a further worsening of the situation. It is also likely that the fighting will result in the dissemination of explosive remnants of war and unexploded ordnances, posing a further threat to civilians. The use by all sides of heavy weapons in densely populated areas has spread terror and contributed to a rising toll of innocent lives lost, including children. In addition, there have been many cases of kidnapping, burning houses, looting, and other acts of revenge. The damage inflicted on public installations in Tripoli's southern and western sections, including the airport, the main oil depot, roads and bridges, is nothing less than tragic. In the east, fighting continues between two coalitions of forces comprising Libya Shield's units, Armed Brigade, and the Ansar Sharia extremist group on one hand, and forces allied to General Khalifa Haftar and the Army Special Forces on the other. The violence has resulted in a significant number of civilian casualties. Mr. President, when I last briefed the Council, I reported on the evacuation of UNSMIL's international staff members from Libya as a result of the escalating conflict and the fighting in and around Janzour, where our premises are located. We continue to stress that this is a temporary measure and that staff will be redeployed once security conditions permit. Notwithstanding this measure, the mission has remained closely engaged with developments in Libya. On August 7, a small team led by my deputy traveled to Tripoli to explore options for an unconditional ceasefire. The visit to Libya was facilitated by the Italian embassy, and I would like to thank Italy for its generosity. During 12 days, the delegation met with a wide range of political and military forces. While all engaged constructively with our proposals, it is very clear that much more work is needed to overcome mistrust between the parties to the conflict. While the mission intends to build on these talks, we believe, Mr. President, that a clear message needs to be sent to the warring parties, reminding them of their obligations under international humanitarian law. And I believe your resolution has just done that, whilst also underlining the need for a constructive engagement on their part with a UN-facilitated political dialogue. Mr. President, on August 4th, we attended the inaugural session of the newly elected House of Representatives in Tobruk. Regrettably, many efforts, including ours, to arrive at an agreement over procedural and related issues failed to ensure full participation of all elected members. A number of representatives decided to boycott the sessions. Underlining the importance of safeguarding Libya's fragile transition, with the House of Representatives as the only legitimate elected legislature, we affirmed that every effort must be exerted towards enabling parliamentarians who boycott the House of Representatives to join their colleagues. Mr. President, developments on the battlefield in Libya over the past few weeks are a source of grave concern. More particularly, we strongly condemn indiscriminate shelling. Those responsible for the loss of civilian lives and the destruction of private property and public infrastructure must be held accountable, as those responsible for any ill treatment and torture of prisoners. Of particular concern are reports from Derna that an extremist group has conducted summary trials and executions outside the judicial system. In this regard, I welcome the declaration on 17 August by the Libyan General Prosecutor of his intention to investigate crimes committed during the recent fighting in Tripoli. I urge his office to initiate impartial investigations, even in the absence of formal complaints. I welcome also the recent statements by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, reminding all parties to the conflict that perpetrators of crimes against civilians, as well as those who order or fail to stop them, are liable to prosecution, as are those who incite violence. The threat from the spread of terrorist groups has become real. Their presence and activities in a number of Libyan cities are known to all. At present, the chaotic security situation and the very limited capacity of the government to counter the threat may well have created a fertile ground for a mounting danger in Libya and beyond. Mr. President, in my previous briefing to your esteemed Council, I qualified the aborted June 18-19 political dialogue meeting, which I had intended to convene, as a missed opportunity. Every unsuccessful dialogue initiative is a lost opportunity in Libya. We need to remind Libyan political leaders and brigade commanders that dialogue remains the only alternative to a protracted armed confrontation. No military solution is possible, and the present impasse will be deepened further by the use of force. Although the horizon of a political agreement seems distant, the UN needs to spare no effort towards bringing various actors to the dialogue table. Intimidation or defamation should not distract us from the obligation of being an impartial mediator. With the exception of a minority suspicious of or hostile to the role of the United Nations in Libya, there is a broad-based acceptance of UNSMIL's presence, as well as high expectations. The main and recurrent demand is to see the United Nations contribute more effectively to the protection of the civilian population. There may be wide support in Libya for an enhanced UN presence, but clarity on the modalities and type of support that is to be realistically expected is still lacking. Moreover, there is a great need to seriously address Libyan misperceptions as a condition for a greater UN engagement in Libya. Once again, we have been asked to play a greater role in institution building. An adequate response would necessitate further developing UNSMIL's capacities, but this is not in itself a guarantee for the desired achievement. Previous experience tells us that short of a collective Libyan political will and clearly defined national priorities, UNSMIL is likely to face difficulties in implementation. National ownership is not only about ensuring that the UN's actions are in accordance with Libyan strategies, but require durable Libyan receptivity to subsequent advice and technical assistance. In addition, Libyan national ownership implies a consistent effort in ensuring an effective coordination of international support. UNSMIL has been mandated by your council to play a leading role in this respect, but its success has been limited. It is important to see a coherent Libyan role in enabling concerted efforts. Not less important is the willingness of all friends of Libya to have their activities better coordinated. As elsewhere in the region, radical transformations opened up new opportunities and raised promises. The Libyan experience illustrates the fact that transition is fraught with great risks, some being due to perceived conflicting interests and mutual fears. The legacy of more than 4 decades of despotic rule, as well as reactivated enmities and reinvented hatred in the struggle for power. These risks are also those of seeing Libya's future impacted by regional polarization and proxy rivalries. The threat of derailing the movement of change initiating by the revolution is in all probability mounting. Reversing the descent into more instability and greater uncertainty cannot happen unless various actors in Libya's public life commit themselves in words and in deeds to a democratic political process. The democratic process cannot be reduced to the ballot box and to the emergence of numerical majorities and minorities. Its progress is conditional on upholding principles of pluralism, inclusivity, separation of powers, and adherence to agreed democratic values and norms. Many Libyans continue to be skeptical of the political process in their country and frustrated with their political elites. Low participation in the 2 recent elections is an indication of such erosion of credibility. Disappointment, aggravated by suffering and fear provoked by the armed confrontations, multiplied